Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. You students of the Civil War know that the history of the conflict is filled with anecdotes of how the bonds of Masons were stronger than the political parties and military organizations that divided the North and the South. This portrait, a recent addition to my collection, reminds me of the various stories I've read and some that I've researched that involved Confederate and Union soldiers coming to each other's assistance once it was known that they shared the Masonic connection. The man pictured here is wearing a sash wrapped and knotted around his waist and a hat with a plume and tassel. You can see the red and gold tinting in that tassel. He posed for this portrait in the studio of an unidentified photographer at some point during the 1860s. The 1860s estimate is based upon looking at the mount, the cardstock mount upon which this photograph is pasted. It's about the size of a modern trading card. Back in the day, it was known as a carte de visite, is a format or card photograph, extremely popular in the 1860s. And the double gold border around the edge is a symptom, is a tell that it dates from the 1860s. Though his name is currently lost in time, the distinctive accoutrements and a pencil inscription along the bottom are valuable clues. The inscription is barely readable, but it's in pencil and it says, "The Knights of Virginia," also known as the Knights Templar of Virginia. They were a sect of the Masons sharing the same moral and ethical teachings, an emphasis on brotherhood, and symbols and rituals rooted in medieval and religious traditions. But the Knights Templar required its members to be professed Christians, which was not required throughout the larger Masonic fraternity. Now, back to the individual pictured here. Was he a soldier during the war? If so, did he ever have a need to call on his Masonic connections to help himself out of a tough spot on a battlefield or perhaps in a prison somewhere? Or did he hear the call of a fellow Mason on the northern side and do a good deed for him? Well, until he's identified, we can't know these things. But in researching the Knights Templar of Virginia, I learned that the Masonic ties between brothers on opposite sides of the conflict, though strong as they were quite frayed on the organizational level between the nation and the states. Those organizations governed the Templar Masons across the country. Virginia is a case in point. The middle of the 19th century was a period of strife for the Knights Templar of Virginia. From its earliest days in the first quarter of the century until the 1850s, Templar Masonry evolved into a national organization with member states as the country expanded from coast to coast and agricultural and industrial movements were going on. In the late 1850s, a flurry of name changes and related actions further unified the national and state organizations. They include the titles Grandmaster for leaders and encampment for the organizations. When Civil War divided the country, the separation between the states played out among the national and state Templars. On April 18th, 1861, less than a week after the bombardment of Fort Sumter shocked the nation, Grandmaster Benjamin Brown French, the head of the Knights Templar of the United States of America, distributed a circular reminding all knights of their historic fidelity to each other. 9 days later, on April 27th, a letter from Sir Knight Edward H. Gill, the leader of the Virginia Templars, effectively seceded Virginia's chapter from the national organization. French's circular and Gill's letter are a particularly worthy read because they parallel what was happening in the national conversation between the disunited states. I want to read them to you. So let's begin with French's circular. Stated, Office of the Grandmaster of the Knights Templar of the United States of America, Benjamin Brown French, Grandmaster of the Knights Templar of the United States of America. To all true and patriotic Templars, brotherly love, peace, honor. An awful fratricidal conflict seems to be impending. He alone who rules the destinies of nations can prevent it. He works through human instruments. I implore every Templar knight on the continent of America, after humbly seeking strength and aid from on high, to exert all the means at his command to avert the dread calamity which, to human vision, seems inevitable. Let each Templar to whom this may come remember how often we have stood at each other's side and raised our voices in prayer for the prosperity of a common country and a common cause. Let all call to mind how the Knights of Virginia, mingling in fraternal brotherhood with those of Massachusetts, pledged themselves to each other on Bunker Hill only a few brief years ago, and when another bad passed away, the same noble band stood together in the city of Richmond, in the state of Virginia, the birthplace of Washington, and with mutual vows bound their souls in an everlasting covenant. Let them remember these things, and with hearts on fire, with love for each other and for their countrymen, go forth among those countrymen and implore the arbitrament of peace instead of that of the sword. I ask no one to surrender a principle that has become dear to his heart, but I ask everyone to labor and to pray that such councils may take place between the contending parties who have, for so many years, acted with a common impulse as to restore harmony and kind feeling and avoid the course of having fraternal blood crying to heaven from the ground and bringing down its maledictions on our children's children through all future time. Labor and pray that hostilities may be suspended until the mild counsels of peace can be appealed to, and that the appeal may not be in vain. Casting aside every political feeling, every political aspiration, and asking every Templar to do the same, let us, as one man, unite in one grand effort to prevent the shedding of fraternal blood and to inaugurate here that blessed result which our Lord and Master initiated, peace on earth and goodwill to men. Templars, you count in this land by tens of thousands. Each one has his influence in the circle about him. Never, no, never was there an opportunity to exert that influence in a more holy cause or to a more sublime purpose. Forward then to the rescue of your friends from fratricidal war. I call on every Knight Templar to perform that sacred duty which so well becomes our order of binding up the wounds of the afflicted and comforting those who mourn. Dated at the city of Washington on this 18th day of April in the year of our Lord 1861 and in the year of our order 743. B.B. French, Grandmaster. Now, I want to share with you the response to that circular by Edward Gill of the Virginia Templars. This is dated Justice, Office of the Grandmaster of Knights Templar of Virginia, Lynchburg, Virginia, April 27th, 1861. Honorable B.B. French, Grandmaster, Grand Encampment, Knights Templar of the United States. Sir Knight, your circular of the 18th instant relative to the awful fratricidal conflict which seems to be impending between the citizens of the North and the South has been received. And as the people of the South are merely acting on the defensive in this conflict, those of the North, regardless of that brotherly love, peace, and honor illusion in your circular, having trampled upon their constitutional rights and being now about to invade their soil, their homes, and their firesides and desecrate their altars, I am at a loss to understand why you should send such a circular to the Knights Templar of Virginia. Residing as you do at Washington, you cannot be ignorant of the fact that Virginia has exhausted every honorable means to avert this conflict. Casting aside every political feeling, every political aspiration, she has pled to prevent the shedding of fraternal blood. She has pled for peace on earth and goodwill to men, and she has pled that her constitutional rights and those of her sister states of the South should not be trampled upon, but her pleadings have been disregarded, and conscious of the justice of her cause, she now appeals to the God of battles, confident that heaven will smile approvingly upon her efforts in resisting unto the death this Cain like and marauding attack of the Vandals of the North. And I thank God that the valiant Knights Templar of Virginia unanimously participate in this feeling of resistance and are prepared to welcome their invaders with blood-stained hands to hospitable graves designated by the sprig of evergreen. For the reasons stated, I now, as Grand Master of the Grand Encampment of Knights Templar of the state of Virginia, give you notice that the body is no longer under the jurisdiction of the Grand Encampment of the United States and will no longer regard or obey any orders or edicts emanating from it or its officers. E. H. Gill, Grand Master. So there you have the call from the circular of the Grand Master of the United States Templar Masons to the letter response from the Grand Master of the Virginia Knights Templar. So much reflecting what was going on in the national conversation at that time. And despite the fraying of the organizations, based on the research that I've done and stories I've read, those bonds of masonry on the individual level stood firm. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.